So I've been investigating ways of making of working out the overscan values and making that easier and quicker to calculate. I also wanted to find a way to fix the rounding error issues, which is apparent especially when calculating resolution from focal length. So in this short video, what I want to demonstrate is how I devised and constructed this tool, which I think achieves both objectives. Okay, we'll start by just referring to this script here, because I'm going to create this from scratch inside this empty Nuke script. I've just put this here just as a way of consolidating the maths and the logic as we go through. What we've got at the top are some values that we pretty much know at the beginning of every project. But then down here, and these are the most significant values, we've got three attributes down here that the tool is going to generate automatically. The only other value that isn't in here is the new width. But because we're going to be able to generate the aspect ratio, we're going to be able to compute that, so I'm not concerned about that. We will create a value for it, and hopefully that will auto-generate as well from the aspect ratio. So construction of this tool, very similar to the checkmate tool that I created a little while ago, albeit this time using some expressions with some simple mathematic formulas. What I'll be doing then is I'll be basically converting this into a gizmo and then installing it on my local machine so that it can be accessed from a Nuke toolbar in any script. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a no-op node. This is like a null; it serves no purpose, but I'm going to use it as a platform on which to build my tool. Okay, we can see it's called no-op. I'm just going to call it tool. It's not autobiographical. Okay, that's just going to sit there as a container. Okay, and then what I'm going to do then is I'm going to hit Ctrl G to group this, and this I'm going to name my focal length finder. Okay, and this will actually be the name of the gizmo when I output it. Okay, so inside the group is this simple no-op node, which I've called tool, and it's got an input and an output which is automatically generated when you create a group. So that sits there now. That's its input and that's its output. So it can basically be plugged in if I need it. Having said that, I see no reason why this would need to be plugged in. This is just there as a reference node, just so that you can bring it up and actually perform some calculations. Okay, so on to the user controls then. So this is something that I haven't shown before, I don't think, which is using expressions. So this is my focal length finder, this is my group level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface with some controls on here, which will basically sit at the front of the control panel when this is a gizmo. Okay, so to actually create these tools, I'm actually going to right click just in space on the properties here and choose Manage User Knobs. That brings up this panel, and this is like an interface designer for creating tools and then basically linking various values from various properties and various nodes to each other to create complex networks which allow you to do some quite impressive things. This is very much at the beginner end of that. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a text element. I'll just call it Note 1. I don't need to add a label onto this. The label is like this. It's one of these that appears there just to tell you what the tool is. This is just a text element. So I've just typed find focal length from resolution. If I choose OK, you can see that now up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now put four attribute value sliders into this. One to hold the original width, one to hold the original height, one to hold the new width, and one to hold the new height. So I'm just going to choose the floating point slider for this. So orig width, that's the name of the variable, so that is the name of the of what we're going to be calling in our expression, and then this is just a label, so I'll just type original width, and I don't need to give it any initial value. That will create this slider here, which will allow me to just bung a value into this this property box. Okay, I've just noticed a typo in my text box, 2 N's in there, so I'll just clear that out while I'm at it. Now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a new one, so this is very repetitive now. Orig height, so you can see I've now got 2 values for my original width and height, so 2 more. New width, and new height. Okay. Now, one of the things that we should have established by now is that these values have to be all integers. They can't be percentages. Because basically a percentage would represent a fraction of a pixel, and that isn't possible. So these must contain whole integers. But obviously these values allow us potentially to put anything into there. So I'm just going to put another text object. I'm just going to call this note 2, and I'm just going to put a little alert about that into there. Okay, so you can see what I've put in there. The new item width must be all integers to prevent the rounding error. Okay, so I'll just add a little divider, which just creates this little line, because the next section I'm going to create will be variables for the focal length. Okay, so I'm going to add another one, and this will be original focal length, and then another one for the new focal length. Okay, this is looking quite cool so far. I'll just add in another divider. And then the final one I'm going to do will be the aspect ratio. So I'll just set the variable to AR and the descriptive label to aspect ratio. Okay, that will do us nicely, so I can close this down. So we can see that we've got this tool now. So this this is the front level interface. So when we start to create user knobs, you can see that it automatically creates this little tab called user, and within this it actually starts to create all these knobs and controls that we can use to make this actually calculate some things for us. So I'm going to start by setting up the code for the aspect ratio. If we look at the calculation down here on the backdrop node, we can see that the calculation for that is the original width divided by the original height. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in from our project 1280 width by 720, just so that we can test this in the process. Okay, so that's my original width and original height. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put an expression into the aspect ratio which is actually going to refer to these values. So I choose add expression, and now I start to type the variable. So we've established that I'm dividing the original width by the original height. So I type that in, and it gives me an error saying there's nothing for original width. Now, did I have a capital? Yes, I did. I put a capital in between. I didn't do that consistently, which is really my bad, because I really should have a sort of a consistent approach to this. But you can see that if I get that right, then the result appears inside here as a test to tell me that that's the value, and we can see that that's the value in here. So I can accept that. So that is giving me the width. Obviously that's not enough in itself. I need to compute the aspect ratio. So I'm going to edit this expression. I'm going to come back to it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this by the original height, and you can see that this is now computing and it's giving me an aspect ratio, and we know this aspect ratio to be correct, this 1.7778. okay, so this is automatically now creating an aspect ratio. So, and just to demonstrate that, if I start to change the height without changing the width, then I'm changing the shape of the image, and you can see the aspect ratio changing accordingly. So this is a very precise way of actually giving us some accurate information. So in a way, we're off to a great start. This is the first automated value. Okay, so we can now move on to our second calculation, which will be to get the new height. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type an arbitrary value into the new width. Okay, 1888. This was a value that we established when we were doing one of the conversions. This was the one that we actually rounded up to 1890. Anyway, I'm leaving it in its unrounded state here, which is 1888. So, but for the sake of this, it's an arbitrary value, but it will allow us to test the new height. Okay, so I'm going to come into the new height and add an expression. Okay, so the logic here, if we look at the get new height, what we're doing here is that we are basically taking the original width and dividing that by the original height. So essentially what we're doing is we're getting the aspect ratio, because we basically already did that calculation up here. So we're getting the aspect ratio, and then what we're doing is that we are dividing the new width, which we've set up here, by that aspect ratio. Okay, so that is essentially the logic behind this. So if I type new width, that's saying that there's an error there, so maybe I didn't capitalize the W on this one. Yep. So the new width is 1888. Okay, so that's so far so good. So what we want to do now is we want to divide this by, and now we want that calculation. So we could just type in AR here, which is the aspect ratio, and that gives us the new height. Okay, but I'll do the full maths just because I think it makes it easier to understand if you go back later on and you're just going into these expressions and looking at what they do. So this is a formula within a formula, so I need to put it inside parentheses. So what I want to do here is I want to choose original width, and I want to divide that by original height. Okay, so I'm getting some errors here, so I just need to flick through and see if I can find which was causing it. So it was just the capitalization in the variables. So this is my maths. So this sum within the sum is establishing the aspect ratio, which is the original width divided by the original height, and then we're dividing the new width by the aspect ratio, and that's giving us this result of 1062, and we can see that's in there. So if I now start to increase this value, we can see that as I change the width, whenever the aspect ratio stays as it is, then we get a commensurate adjustment to the new height value. And you can see the rounding up error occurring straight away there because we're not getting whole integers. There, that's the only point where we get the whole integer. Okay, so we'll finish up by getting the last one, which is the focal length, or should I say the new focal length. And we can see the mathematics and the logic here. So we can see that what are we doing? Again, we've got a formula within a formula. So what we're doing in this particular case is we're establishing the original width divided by the new width, and then we are multiplying that value, which is essentially the difference between the two, we're multiplying that value by the original focal length. Okay, so let's do it. So we want to get the new focal length here, so this is the one that we're after. In order to test it, I'm just going to put in the value of 62, which we were using earlier on. Even though it's an arbitrary value, it does allow me to test this. So now I come into the box and add the expression, and again what I'm doing here is original width. This is the formula within the formula, so I need to put it inside parentheses. So this is the original width divided by the new width. Okay, and we can see that that's giving me this value of 0.677966, and then I'm going to multiply this by the original focal length, and we can see that that gives us a value of 42.0339. And again, because that is based on values that have been created here, then if I start to change any of these values, we can see that that is having a commensurate effect on the new focal length. So that is pretty much it for creating a tool like this. I would probably want to give it a funky colour, which I've now done. I might also want to do something with the text, but I could even use the postage stamp and make it big and bold. But to be honest, these are just cosmetic things. The important thing is with a group is that we have the opportunity to export as a gizmo. So I'm just going to copy the name of the group, which is Focal Length Finder, choose Export as Gizmo, go to my desktop, and then choose Focal Length Finder, and it will append that with the gizmo, the gizmo suffix. Okay, so now I've already gone through the process of actually installing this, so you can see that I've got my Focal Length Finder here. So if I just delete that group for now and I come in here to my Focal Length Finder, you can see that this is basically the tool that I've been creating previously. So again, if I just populate that, so my original width was 1280, my original height was 720, and we can see that that's already calculated my aspect ratio. To work out my new height, I just have to put an arbitrary width in there, which we did 1888, and you can see that that automatically works out the new height based on that aspect ratio there. And then the final thing is to calculate the new focal length, and we can see that at this width and height, the focal length is there. So you can see that I can just pull this into any script as and when I need it, providing this is installed on the local machine that I'm using. Okay, so that is basically it. I hope you found that useful. As I say, this is kind of like my first, in demonstration terms, this is my first foray into using expressions and building a little custom tool like this with with these auto calculators. What I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this tutorial because I'm already at the sort of 20 minute mark, and I probably need at least that to properly test this with some actual footage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this with a second tutorial. I'm going to go back to the previous examples when we were calculating the the resolution from the focal length and focal length from resolution, and I'm going to see how the tool helps us to actually compute those and see if we can do something about the rounding up errors.